go ahead and jump to your module directory and open up step 4, which is the trails.module file, and it's called Refactor Code. Go ahead and copy this code and paste it into your trails.module file, overwriting everything that's there already. We've done two things with this file. The first is that we've replaced any variable gets and variable sets with calls to the database table, the history table. And secondly, what we've done is abstracted out the processes of adding, removing, and fetching history data into separate functions. So they're encapsulated in utility functions. And this is in general a good practice when creating applications that you think that other modules might want to use. So this is the beginnings of an API. I'm going to go ahead and scroll up to the top, and let's go ahead and go through the code and see what's changed. So first of all, in our hook init function, we have a call to a new function called Trails History Add, and the process of adding our item to the history has been removed. So this function here is where all of that happens. And we'll get to that near the bottom of the file where we've added our functions. Nothing's changed in our permission function, or our menu function, or our info function. Our configuration and save functions for the block are the same. But here, when we get to the view function, the implementation of hook block view, we have a little bit of a difference going on here. Instead of loading our history with a variable get, we're instead using a function called Trails History Fetch, and this function will grab the data from the database and then return it as an array, which can then get looped through just the same as we did with the unserialized array that we got back from variable get. So that's just mostly a single line change there. Scroll down. And then Trails cron, the last function that was in our previous file, has been replaced with a single function called Trails History Prune. And this function will remove excess data from the history table. Okay, now we get to our new functions. First of all, we have our Trails History Add, and this is what gets called on hook init. So every time a page is loaded, this function will run. The first thing we're doing is globalizing our user variable so that we can use it. There's not many variables in Drupal that we can do this with, but what happens when we globalize a variable is that then that variable is available to any functions that define it as a global. And so it can adjust it, and any changes that are made to it here persist throughout the existence of that variable. Our next step is to trigger the session ID for a user, even if they're anonymous. And the way that we can do that is by setting a variable to save in the session variable. So the session variable looks like this, and we're just creating a new variable in there and assigning it true just to have something in the session table. If we don't set this, then a session won't be created for anonymous users. But we want to save that data in order to track the user as they use the site. And then the next step is to use a query to grab the user data and the page data and then put it into the database. So now we're using a PHP function called Mysql Query, and this is the wrong way to do it. But I just wanted to demonstrate this because if you're not familiar with using an abstraction layer, this is the structure that you're going to be familiar with. So we can then translate this into the database abstraction later. So what we're doing is inserting into Trails history, and we're just running through each column and giving it a value. We're giving timestamp the current time, and we're using the constant request time for this so that we don't have to use the PHP function time, which will improve performance just a little bit. We're grabbing the path from the query string. We're getting the title using the Drupal get title function. And we're grabbing the SID, the session ID, and the UID from the user object that we globalized above. Okay, so this is the process of inserting history into the database. Let's scroll down to the next function, which is called Trails History Fetch. This is the function that we used in the view function for the block in order to grab history for a particular user. What we're doing is globalizing the user variable because we want to grab just the history that corresponds to the current user, and that's what the user variable is. And then we're using Mysql Query. Again, this is not what we would normally want to do. We're going to use the database abstraction layer and the functions that go along with that, but this is what we would do if we weren't aware of the abstraction layer. And we're just selecting everything from the Trails history table, where the UID equals the UID of the current user. We're going to sort by timestamp descending, which means the newest page visits will display at the top, which simplifies our code a bit, because in our previous module, what we did was reorder that array in reverse, but we don't need to do that because we have a table that we can simply sort differently by. And then we're setting the limit. We're saying we want to start at 0, so the very first entry, and we want to go all the way through up to number. And this number is being passed as a parameter to the function, which will limit the number of results that we get back from this. And then we're going to loop through and use a function called mysql fetch array and load the rows that gets pulled in through that function into a variable called history, and then we're going to return the history. Okay, one more function called Trails history prune, and this is what's called during our cron runs in order to delete all of the data that's older than a certain amount. And we're passing that timestamp as a parameter here. The query is very simple. We're just using delete from Trails history where the timestamp is less than the timestamp that we're passing to it.